The relentless howl of the wind tears through the icy landscape, each gust a razor-sharp reminder of nature's unforgiving power. Amidst this frozen hell, a lone figure stumbles forward, his breath ragged and his vision blurred by the swirling snow. This is Alex Lowe, world-renowned mountaineer, now reduced to a desperate struggle for survival in one of Earth's most hostile environments. 72 hours ago, Alex was on top of the world, both figuratively and literally. A seasoned climber with decades of experience conquering the planet's most challenging peaks, he had set out to tackle a treacherous route on Mount McKinley in Alaska. But now, separated from his team and lost in a blinding snowstorm, Alex faces the fight of his life. Every step is a battle against the elements. Every breath a painful reminder of the thin air at this extreme altitude. As we delve into Alex's harrowing tale of survival, we must first understand the man behind the legend. Born in Montana in 1968, Alex Lowe developed a passion for climbing at an early age. Growing up in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains, he spent his childhood scrambling up rocky outcrops and dreaming of conquering the world's highest peaks. By his teens, he was already tackling challenging routes in Glacier National Park, honing his skills and building the incredible strength and endurance that would become his trademark. By his 20s, Alex had already made a name for himself in the mountaineering community. Known for his incredible strength, endurance, and seemingly superhuman ability to adapt to high altitudes, he quickly became one of the most respected climbers of his generation. Fellow mountaineers spoke in awe of his ability to move fast and light through terrain that would leave others gasping for breath. His list of accomplishments reads like a mountaineer dream resume: multiple ascents of Mount Everest, first ascents of peaks in Antarctica, and speed records on some of the world's most challenging routes. From the towering faces of Yosemite to the wind-swept peaks of Patagonia, Alex left his mark on nearly every major climbing destination around the globe. But it was his upcoming expedition to Mount McKinley that Alex believed would be his crowning achievement. Known as Denali to the indigenous peoples of Alaska, this formidable peak stands as the highest mountain in North America, its summit piercing the sky at a staggering 20,310 feet. More than just a tall mountain, Denali is renowned for its brutal weather conditions and technical climbing challenges. The expedition began like many others, with meticulous planning and a team of highly skilled climbers. Alex had assembled a group of 4 other elite mountaineers, each bringing their own unique skills and experiences to the team. Their goal was audacious: to pioneer a new route up the mountain's treacherous south face, a feat that had never been accomplished before. In the weeks leading up to the expedition, Alex threw himself into preparation. He spent hours poring over maps and satellite imagery, studying every contour and crevasse of the route they planned to tackle. He fine-tuned his already impressive physical condition, pushing himself to new limits in the gym and on training climbs. At night, he would lie awake, visualizing each pitch of the climb, mentally preparing himself for the challenges that lay ahead. As the team made their final preparations in the small town of Talkeetna, the excitement was palpable. They checked and double-checked their gear, ensuring that every piece of equipment was in perfect condition. The night before their departure, they gathered for a final meal together, sharing stories and dreams of the adventure that awaited them. The next morning, under a sky streaked with the pink and gold of an Alaskan sunrise, they boarded a small plane that would take them to the Kahiltna Glacier, the starting point for their ascent. As the plane soared over the vast wilderness, Alex pressed his face to the window, taking in the breathtaking landscape below. Snow-capped peaks stretched as far as the eye could see, a sea of white broken only by the occasional dark slash of exposed rock. Landing on the glacier was a heart-pounding experience in itself. The pilot skillfully maneuvered the plane onto a makeshift runway of packed snow, the skis crunching as they touched down. As Alex stepped out onto the ice, the enormity of their undertaking hit him full force. Denali loomed in the distance, its massive bulk dominating the horizon, both beckoning and threatening. The first few days of the climb were everything Alex had hoped for. The team made steady progress up the lower slopes of the mountain, their crampons biting into the firm snow as they ascended. They established a series of camps, each one taking them higher into the thin air of the upper mountain. As they made their way up the mountain, the team encountered increasingly difficult conditions. Ice fields gave way to near-vertical rock faces, requiring all of their technical skill and experience to navigate safely. The air grew thinner with each passing day, and even Alex, with his remarkable ability to acclimatize, found himself breathing hard with every move. Despite the challenges, Alex felt alive in a way he only experienced in the mountains. There was a purity to the experience, a stripping away of all the complexities of modern life until only the essentials remained. The next hold, the next step, the next breath. In these moments, perched on the side of the mountain with thousands of feet of exposure below him, Alex felt a profound connection to the natural world and his place within it. It was on the fourth day of their ascent that disaster struck. The team had just reached their high camp, a small platform carved into the snow at 19,000 feet. They were preparing for their push to the summit the next day, melting snow for water and checking their oxygen systems, when Alex noticed a change in the air. The wind, which had been steady but manageable, began to pick up speed. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, obscuring the summit and bringing with them an ominous sense of foreboding. Within hours, a storm of terrifying intensity descended upon the mountain. Visibility dropped to near zero, and the wind howled with such ferocity that communication became impossible. The team's tent, designed to withstand extreme conditions, strained against its anchors, the fabric flapping violently in the gale. As the storm raged on, Alex and his teammates huddled together in the tent, shouting to be heard over the roar of the wind. They knew they were in a dangerous situation. At this altitude, with temperatures plummeting and winds gusting over 100 miles per hour, their margin for error was razor thin. It was in this moment of crisis that Alex's years of experience came to the fore. He knew that their best chance of survival lay in staying put and waiting out the storm. Moving in these conditions would be suicide. He conveyed this to his team, his voice steady despite the fear that gnawed at his insides. For hours, they remained in their tent, the nylon walls their only protection against the fury of the storm. Sleep was impossible. The noise alone would have prevented it, but more than that, each of them knew that to succumb to exhaustion now could mean death. Instead, they took turns checking their gear, massaging feeling back into cold limbs, and offering what encouragement they could to one another. As the night wore on, the storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it seemed to be intensifying. The tent poles creaked ominously under the strain, and snow began to accumulate around the edges, threatening to bury them alive. It was then that Alex made a decision that would change the course of his life. Realizing that staying in the tent was becoming increasingly dangerous, Alex proposed that they attempt to descend to a lower, more sheltered position. It was a risky move, but with their supplies dwindling and the threat of avalanches growing with each passing hour, he felt they had no choice. The team prepared as best they could, donning every layer of clothing they had and securing their most critical gear. As they stepped out of the tent into the maelstrom, the full force of the storm hit them like a physical blow. The wind, now gusting at over 120 miles per hour, threatened to tear them from the mountain. Snow and ice pellets stung their exposed skin, and the cold cut through their layers, as if they were wearing nothing at all. Roped together, the team began their desperate descent. Every step was a battle against the elements, every moment fraught with danger. They moved slowly, probing the snow ahead of them for hidden crevasses, their world reduced to the small circle of visibility provided by their headlamps. It was in this chaos, as they navigated a particularly treacherous section of the route, that disaster struck. A sudden gust of wind, more powerful than any before, swept across the mountain. Alex, who was in the lead, felt his feet leave the ground as the wind lifted him bodily from the slope. For a heart-stopping moment, he was airborne, the rope connecting him to his teammates stretched taut. Then, as suddenly as it had lifted him, the wind dropped Alex back onto the mountain. But the damage was done. The force of his fall and the weight of his pack caused him to lose his balance. Before he could self-arrest, he was sliding down the icy slope, picking up speed with each passing second. The next few moments were a blur of motion and fear. Alex tumbled down the mountain, his ice axe torn from his grasp, powerless to stop his descent. He could hear the shouts of his teammates, but they were quickly lost in the roar of the wind and the sound of his own body impacting the snow and ice. When he finally came to a stop, Alex found himself alone in a world of white. The storm raged around him, but the sounds of his teammates were gone. The rope that had connected him to them had snapped during his fall, leaving him isolated and disoriented. As the reality of his situation set in, Alex felt a wave of panic threaten to overwhelm him. He was alone, separated from his team, with minimal gear and no clear idea of his location on the mountain. The storm continued unabated, reducing visibility to mere feet and making any attempt at navigation nearly impossible. It's at this moment, when all seems lost for Alex, that we ask you to consider supporting our channel. Your subscription helps us bring these incredible stories of human endurance to light. Hit that subscribe button now, and let's continue this gripping journey together. In the immediate aftermath of his fall, Alex's training kicked in. He knew that his first priority had to be shelter. Exposed on the mountainside, he would quickly succumb to hypothermia. Fighting against the wind and his own exhaustion, he began to dig into a steep snow bank, creating a small cave that might just save his life. As he burrowed deeper into the snow, the howling of the wind began to fade, replaced by an eerie silence. The contrast was jarring, and for a moment, Alex felt as if he had entered another world. The snow cave was cramped and dark, but it offered a desperately needed respite from the storm raging outside. Inside his makeshift shelter, Alex took stock of his situation. The fall had left him battered and bruised, but miraculously, he had avoided any serious injuries. However, his equipment had not fared as well. His backpack, containing most of his food and survival gear, had been torn away during the tumble down the mountain. All he had left was what he wore on his body and a few items secured in his pockets. The inventory was grim: a single energy bar, a nearly empty water bottle, a small emergency kit containing a lighter and a few packets of chemical hand warmers, and his trusty multi-tool. His heavy outer layers had protected him during the fall, but they were now wet with snow, their insulating properties compromised. As the adrenaline of the fall and subsequent shelter building wore off, Alex began to feel the cold seeping into his bones. He knew that hypothermia was his most immediate threat. With shaking hands, he activated one of the chemical hand warmers, clutching it close to his body in an attempt to generate some warmth. The next few hours were a constant battle against the cold and the creeping tendrils of despair. Alex forced himself to stay awake, knowing that falling asleep in his condition could be fatal. To keep his mind active, he ran through survival scenarios, considering and discarding various plans of action. As the long night wore on, Alex's thoughts turned to his family back home. He thought of his wife, her smile, the sound of her laugh. He pictured his children, their faces alight with excitement as he returned from previous expeditions, eager to hear tales of his adventures. The thought of never seeing them again filled him with a determination that burned hotter than any fire. With this renewed resolve, Alex began to formulate a plan. He knew that his best chance of rescue lay in descending the mountain, but in the current conditions, any movement was extremely risky. He decided that when dawn broke, if the storm had abated, he would attempt to make his way down. If the storm continued, he would need to hunker down and conserve his energy, hoping that a rescue team would be mobilized once his absence was noted. As he waited for the first signs of dawn, Alex focused on small tasks to keep himself occupied. He massaged his limbs to promote circulation, performed isometric exercises to generate heat, and carefully rationed his meager food and water supplies. Each minute felt like an hour, each hour an eternity. Finally, after what seemed like days, but was in reality only about 12 hours, Alex noticed a change in the quality of light filtering through the walls of his snow cave. The storm, which had raged unabated for so long, began to show signs of weakening. The howling wind gradually diminished to a low moan, and the constant patter of snow against the cave's entrance slowed. Cautiously, Alex crawled to the entrance of his shelter and peered out. The world beyond was transformed. Where there had been a chaotic maelstrom of wind and snow, there was now an eerie stillness. The sky was beginning to clear, revealing patches of deep blue between the dissipating clouds. The landscape that greeted Alex was both beautiful and terrifying. The storm had blanketed everything in a thick layer of fresh snow, obscuring landmarks and creating a disorienting uniformity to the terrain. The sun, now rising above the eastern horizon, cast a golden glow across the snow, its beauty a stark contrast to the deadly nature of Alex's situation. As Alex emerged fully from his snow cave, the true challenge of his predicament became clear. The storm had drastically altered the mountain's topography, making navigation extremely difficult. Familiar routes were now hidden under feet of new snow, and the risk of avalanches had increased significantly. The vast expanse of white before him was both beautiful and terrifying, a blank canvas that held the power to both save and destroy him. Alex took a moment to center himself, drawing on years of experience and training. He knew that panic was his enemy now, just as surely as the cold and the treacherous terrain. With deliberate calmness, he began to assess the situation. The sun, now climbing higher in the sky, provided some warmth, but he knew it was a double-edged sword. The heat would begin to destabilize the new snow, increasing the avalanche risk as the day progressed. His first priority was to establish his location. Without his pack and the GPS device it contained, Alex had to rely on old-school navigation techniques. He studied the sun's position and the shadows cast by the mountain's features, trying to orient himself. The familiar peaks and ridges were there, but the new snow had softened their outlines, making them harder to recognize. After several minutes of careful observation, Alex felt reasonably confident about his general location on the mountain. He was lower than he had been before the storm hit, but still dangerously high. The descent ahead would be treacherous, but it was his only chance for survival. Before setting out, Alex took stock of his physical condition. The night in the snow cave had left him stiff and sore, his muscles protesting every movement. His extremities were numb, a worrying sign of potential frostbite. He spent several painful minutes rubbing his hands and feet, encouraging blood flow to return to his fingers and toes. The process was agonizing, pins and needles giving way to a burning sensation as circulation slowly returned. With no food left and only a few sips of water in his bottle, Alex knew he was operating on borrowed time. Dehydration and hypothermia were constant threats, their effects amplified by the extreme altitude. He scooped up a handful of clean snow, letting it melt in his mouth. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. As he prepared to begin his descent, Alex's thoughts turned to his team. Had they survived the storm? Were they searching for him now? The uncertainty weighed heavily on him, but he pushed the thoughts aside. Right now, he had to focus on his own survival. One step at a time, one problem at a time. That was the only way he would make it through this ordeal. With a deep breath, Alex took his first step into the unknown. The snow was deep, coming up to his knees with each step. Every movement was a battle against exhaustion and the treacherous terrain. He moved slowly, each foot placement a careful negotiation with the mountain. The first hour of his descent was grueling but uneventful. Alex fell into a rhythm, his world narrowing to the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other. The monotony was broken only by the occasional pause to check his bearings and scan the slope ahead for dangers. It was during one of these pauses, about 2 hours into his journey, that Alex heard a sound that made his blood run cold. A low rumble, barely audible at first, began to grow in intensity. He recognized it instantly, the sound of an avalanche. Alex's head snapped up, his eyes scanning the slopes above him frantically. For a heart-stopping moment, he couldn't locate the source of the sound. Then he saw it, a wall of snow and ice, hurtling down the mountain at terrifying speed. It was off to his left, maybe a quarter mile away, but in these conditions, distance was no guarantee of safety. Instinct and training took over. Alex knew he had only seconds to act. He looked around desperately for shelter, any feature that might offer protection from the oncoming slide. His eyes locked onto a large boulder about 50 yards downslope. It wasn't ideal, but it was his only option. Alex began to move, pushing through the deep snow with a strength born of pure adrenaline. Each step was a battle against the soft powder that seemed determined to hold him back. The roar of the avalanche grew louder, drowning out the sound of his own labored breathing. Time seemed to slow down. Alex was acutely aware of every detail around him. The glare of the sun on the snow, the burn in his muscles, the thunderous approach of the avalanche. He pushed himself harder, his lungs screaming for oxygen in the thin air. With a final, desperate lunge, Alex reached the boulder. He pressed himself against its lee side, making himself as small as possible. The rock wasn't large enough to fully shield him, but it was all he had. He closed his eyes and waited for impact. The next few moments were a chaos of sound and motion. The leading edge of the avalanche hit the boulder with tremendous force, the impact reverberating through the rock and into Alex's body. Snow poured around the sides of his shelter, threatening to tear him away. He clung to the boulder with every ounce of strength he had left, his fingers finding desperate purchase on the cold stone. As quickly as it had come, the worst of the avalanche passed. Alex remained pressed against the boulder, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. Slowly, cautiously, he opened his eyes. The world around him had been transformed once again. Where there had been a pristine slope of untouched snow, there was now a chaotic jumble of snow, ice, and debris. The avalanche had reshaped the mountain, creating new hazards and obliterating old landmarks. Alex took a shaky breath, the reality of his near miss hitting him full force. He had survived, but the experience had shaken him to his core. The mountain, which had always been a source of challenge and exhilaration for him, now felt like an implacable enemy, determined to claim his life. As the adrenaline of the avalanche encounter began to wear off, Alex became acutely aware of his physical state. The mad dash to the boulder had depleted what little energy reserves he had left. His legs trembled with exhaustion, and a deep, bone-chilling cold had settled into his body. The brief exertion had caused him to sweat, and now that moisture was rapidly cooling, accelerating the onset of hypothermia. Alex knew he couldn't afford to stay in one place for long. The avalanche might have passed, but its effects lingered. The slope was now even more unstable, and the risk of secondary slides was high. Moreover, his body desperately needed the warmth that movement would generate. With great effort, Alex pushed himself away from the boulder that had saved his life. His muscles protested, stiff from the cold and the tension of the past few minutes. Each movement was a negotiation between the need to keep moving and the desire to curl up and give in to exhaustion. As he resumed his descent, Alex found the going even more difficult than before. The avalanche had filled in his previous tracks, erasing any sign of his passage. Worse, it had created a lunar landscape of snow humps and hollows, each step a potential trap for his weary legs. The sun was now high in the sky, its glare off the snow intense and disorienting. Alex had lost his sunglasses in the fall that had separated him from his team, and the brightness was taking its toll. His eyes burned, and a pounding headache began to build behind his temples. He fashioned a makeshift eye shield from a strip torn from his jacket lining, but it provided little relief. As the day wore on, Alex's progress slowed to a crawl. What should have been a manageable descent in normal conditions had become an epic struggle against the mountain and his own failing body. He found himself stopping more frequently, each rest longer than the last, the temptation to simply lie down in the snow growing stronger with each passing hour. It was during one of these rest periods, as Alex sat slumped against a small outcropping of rock, that he experienced a moment of profound despair. The magnitude of his situation crashed over him like a wave. He was alone, injured, and lost on one of the most unforgiving mountains in the world. His chances of survival, he realized, were growing slimmer by the minute. For a brief, dark moment, Alex considered giving up. The thought of simply lying down in the snow and letting the cold take him was perversely appealing. It would be peaceful, he thought, like drifting off to sleep. No more struggle, no more pain. But as quickly as the thought had come, Alex banished it from his mind. He was not a man who gave up easily. Throughout his climbing career, he had faced and overcome countless challenges. This, he decided, would be no different. He thought of his family waiting for him at home, of the pain his loss would cause them. He wouldn't put them through that. With a groan of effort, Alex pushed himself back to his feet. His body screamed in protest, but he ignored it. He took one step, then another, each movement a small victory against the mountain and his own fatigue. As the afternoon wore on, Alex's world narrowed to a singular focus. Keep moving. Everything else, the cold, the hunger, the pain, faded into the background. He became a machine, his legs moving automatically, his mind detached from the physical struggle. It was in this state of exhausted attachment that Alex almost missed a crucial landmark. Through eyes blurred with fatigue and snow blindness, he caught a glimpse of a familiar rock formation. It took his tired brain several moments to process what he was seeing, but when recognition dawned, it hit him like a jolt of electricity. The formation was one he had noted on the ascent, a distinctive stack of rocks that marked the approach to one of their lower camps. If he was seeing it now, it meant he had descended further than he had realized. More importantly, it meant he was on the right path. This realization gave Alex a much-needed second wind. He pushed on with renewed determination, his steps gaining a purpose they had lacked before. The camp, he knew, would have supplies, food, water, perhaps even a working radio. It represented his best chance for survival. As the sun began to dip towards the western horizon, casting long shadows across the snow, Alex finally caught sight of the camp, or rather, what remained of it. The storm that had separated him from his team had not spared the campsite. The tents were gone, likely buried under feet of new snow or carried away by the fierce winds. For a moment, Alex felt a crushing wave of disappointment, but he pushed it aside, forcing himself to approach the site methodically. Even if the tents were gone, there might still be supplies to be found. As he neared the camp's location, Alex began to probe the snow with his ice axe, searching for any sign of buried equipment. For long minutes, he found nothing, each fruitless jab of the axe chipping away at his renewed hope. Then, just as the light was beginning to fade, his axe struck something solid. With trembling hands, Alex began to dig, ignoring the pain in his frozen fingers. Inch by inch, he uncovered his prize, a bright yellow stuffed sack, the kind used to keep sleeping bags dry. With a surge of desperate strength, Alex pulled the sack from the snow. He fumbled with the closure, his numb fingers clumsy and uncooperative. Finally, he managed to open it, spilling the contents onto the snow. Inside was a sleeping bag, wet but still usable, and, miracle of miracles, an emergency kit. Alex's hand shook as he opened the kit, revealing a small stove, some fuel, a few packets of dehydrated food, and a first aid kit. But the item that brought tears to his eyes was a small, battery-powered emergency beacon. With fumbling fingers, Alex activated the beacon. Its small LED began to blink, a tiny red light against the gathering darkness. That steady pulse represented hope. Hope that someone would find him. Hope that he might survive this ordeal. As night began to fall in earnest, Alex set about making use of his newfound supplies. He cleared a small area of snow and set up the stove. The simple act of focusing on a task, helping to calm his frayed nerves. The hiss of the stove as it flared to life was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. While snow melted for water and a packet of freeze-dried stroganoff rehydrated, Alex turned his attention to his physical condition. He removed his boots, wincing at the sight of his feet. They were pale and waxy, clear signs of frostbite. He knew he risked losing toes, possibly more, but there was little he could do about it now. He massaged his feet as best he could, encouraging blood flow, before wrapping them in the few dry layers he had left. The meal, when it was ready, was the best thing Alex had ever tasted. He forced himself to eat slowly, knowing that his shrunken stomach might rebel if he ate too quickly. Each spoonful of the reconstituted food felt like it was bringing him back to life, warmth spreading from his core outwards. After eating, Alex took stock of his situation. He had food, he had the means to melt snow for water, and most importantly, he had shelter in the form of the sleeping bag. The beacon was transmitting his location to search and rescue services. All he had to do now was survive the night and wait for rescue. As he settled into the sleeping bag, the events of the past 72 hours washed over Alex. He had faced death multiple times, pushed his body to its absolute limits, and somehow, against all odds, survived. The realization brought with it a complex mix of emotions: relief, gratitude, and a deep, abiding respect for the power of the mountain. The night that followed was long and cold, but it lacked the desperate edge of the previous nights. Cocooned in his sleeping bag, with the reassuring blink of the rescue beacon beside him, Alex drifted in and out of a fitful sleep. His dreams were a chaotic mix of swirling snow, yawning crevasses, and the faces of his loved ones. As the first light of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, Alex was roused from his uneasy slumber by a sound. At first, he thought he was dreaming, the steady thrum of helicopter rotors, growing louder by the second. But as he clawed his way to full consciousness, he realized the sound was real. With a surge of adrenaline, Alex burst from his sleeping bag. He stumbled out onto the snow, waving his arms frantically above his head. The helicopter appeared over a nearby ridge, its searchlight sweeping the mountainside. For a heart-stopping moment, Alex thought it might pass him by. Then the light fixed on his position, and he knew he had been seen. The next few hours passed in a blur. The rescue team worked efficiently, assessing Alex's condition and preparing him for evacuation. As they lifted off, leaving the merciless mountain behind, Alex took one last look at the peak that had nearly claimed his life. In that moment, he felt a complex mix of emotions: relief, gratitude, and a profound respect for the raw power of nature. As the helicopter carried him to safety, Alex's thoughts turned to the future. He knew that his recovery would be long and difficult. The frostbite would leave its mark, and the psychological impact of his ordeal would take time to process. But he also knew that he had been given a second chance at life, an opportunity not afforded to many who find themselves in similar situations. In the days and weeks that followed, Alex's story captivated the world. As he recovered in the hospital, surrounded by family and friends, he reflected on his experience. The ordeal had changed him profoundly, instilling in him a new appreciation for life and a deeper understanding of his own limitations. Alex's tale became more than just a story of survival against impossible odds. It became a testament to the indomitable human spirit, the will to live that can drive us to extraordinary feats when pushed to the brink. It served as a reminder that even in our darkest moments, when all hope seems lost, we possess an inner strength that can carry us through. As Alex began the long process of physical and emotional recovery, he found himself reevaluating his relationship with mountaineering. The passion that had driven him to the world's highest peaks had not diminished, but it was now tempered by a newfound respect for the fragility of life. He vowed to use his experience to educate others about mountain safety and the importance of proper preparation. In the months that followed, Alex became an advocate for mountain rescue services, using his platform to raise awareness and funds for the organizations that had saved his life. He shared his story at conferences and schools, hoping that others could learn from his experience without having to endure the same ordeal. His talks were powerful and moving, often leaving audiences in stunned silence as they contemplated the razor-thin line between life and death in extreme environments. 1 year after his rescue, Alex made a decision that surprised many. He announced his intention to return to Mount McKinley. This time, however, his goal was different. Instead of seeking to conquer the mountain, he wanted to make peace with it. The expedition would be a journey of healing, both for himself and for the mountain environment he had come to respect in a wholly new way. As news of his planned return spread, Alex faced a mix of reactions. Some praised his courage, while others questioned his sanity. How could he go back to the place that had nearly killed him? But for Alex, the decision was clear. He needed to face his fears, to prove to himself that the mountain hadn't broken him. In the months leading up to the expedition, Alex threw himself into preparation with a fervor that surprised even those who knew him best. His training regimen was intense, but it was matched by an equally rigorous focus on mental preparation. He worked with psychologists specializing in trauma, learning techniques to manage the anxiety and flashbacks that still plagued him. As the departure date approached, Alex found himself filled with a mix of excitement and trepidation. The memories of his near-death experience were still vivid, but they were now accompanied by a sense of purpose. This journey wasn't just about him anymore. It was about honoring the mountain and all those who had faced similar challenges. The day of departure dawned clear and cold. As Alex stood at the base of Mount McKinley, looking up at its towering peak, he felt a sense of calm settle over him. The mountain was the same, but he had changed. He was no longer the man who saw the peak as a conquest to be achieved, but as a teacher whose harsh lessons had reshaped his very being. The ascent was slow and methodical. Alex and his team, which included some of the rescuers who had saved his life the year before, took every precaution. They moved with a respect for the mountain that went beyond mere caution. Each step was a negotiation, an acknowledgement of the power of the environment around them. As they climbed higher, Alex found himself retracing the path of his desperate descent. The landscape had changed in the years since his ordeal. Snow had melted and refrozen. Rocks had shifted, but the essence of the mountain remained. At each significant point, Alex paused to reflect, to remember, and to give thanks for his survival. The most poignant moment came when they reached the site where Alex had been found. The team paused here, creating a small memorial. They built a cairn, a simple stack of rocks that would stand as a testament to human resilience and the power of hope. As Alex placed the final stone, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had faced his demons and found peace. The team did not attempt to reach the summit. That had never been the goal. Instead, they turned back at a predetermined point, their mission accomplished. As they began their descent, Alex felt a profound sense of closure. He had returned to the mountain not as a conqueror, but as a student, and the lessons he had learned would stay with him for the rest of his life. Upon his return, Alex's story took on new life. His journey of healing resonated with people far beyond the mountaineering community. He began receiving invitations to speak at conferences on topics ranging from environmental conservation to personal growth. His message was simple but powerful: respect for nature, understanding of one's limits, and the importance of resilience in the face of adversity. In the years that followed, Alex's life took on new purpose. He established a foundation dedicated to mountain safety and environmental protection. The organization focused on educating climbers about the risks of high-altitude mountaineering, funding research into improved safety equipment, and supporting conservation efforts in mountain regions around the world. Alex's personal life also underwent a transformation. His brush with death had given him a new appreciation for the simple joys of everyday life. He spent more time with his family, cherishing moments that he might have previously taken for granted. His children noted that while their father's passion for the mountains hadn't diminished, it was now balanced by a deeper engagement with the world around him. As Alex's story spread, it began to impact the mountaineering community in unexpected ways. Climbers who had previously seen summiting as the ultimate goal began to reevaluate their approach. There was a shift towards a more holistic view of mountaineering, one that valued the journey and the lessons learned as much as the achievement of reaching the peak. This shift was not without controversy. Some old-school climbers accused Alex and others of his mindset of softening the sport, but Alex stood firm in his convictions. He argued that true strength lay not in reckless pursuit of goals, but in understanding one's place in the natural world and respecting its power. 5 years after his near-fatal expedition, Alex was invited to give a TED Talk. Standing on the stage, he looked out at the audience and began to speak. He told the story of his 72 hours trapped in the frozen wilderness, But he went beyond the mere recounting of events. He spoke of the profound shift in perspective that comes from facing one's own mortality. He talked about the beauty and terror of the mountain, the depth of human resilience, and the importance of humility in the face of nature's power. As he concluded his talk, Alex shared a thought that had come to define his post-rescue life. The mountain doesn't care about your goals, your dreams, or your ego. It simply is. Our task is not to conquer these wild places, but to approach them with respect, to learn from them, and to return home safely, carrying the lessons they've taught us. The impact of Alex's words rippled far beyond the auditorium. His talk went viral, reaching millions of people around the world. Many who had never set foot on a mountain found themselves moved by his story and his message. It sparked conversations about our relationship with nature, the pursuit of extreme goals, and the true meaning of success. In academic circles, Alex's experience became a case study in survival psychology and decision-making under extreme stress. Researchers analyzed every aspect of his ordeal, from his initial survival strategies to his mental state during the long hours alone on the mountain. The insights gained from this analysis led to improvements in wilderness survival training and helped shape new protocols for search and rescue operations. The outdoor equipment industry also took note of Alex's story, his detailed account of what worked and what didn't. During his ordeal led to innovations in cold weather gear and emergency equipment. Several companies approached Alex to consult on the development of new products designed to improve safety in extreme environments. As the 10th anniversary of his rescue approached, Alex found himself reflecting on the long journey he had undertaken, not just on the mountain, but in the years since. He realized that while the physical scars of his ordeal had faded, the mental and emotional impact continued to shape his life in profound ways. He decided to mark the anniversary by writing a book. It would not be just an account of his 72 hours on the mountain, but a deeper exploration of the human spirit and our complex relationship with the natural world. The writing process was cathartic, allowing Alex to process aspects of his experience that he had previously struggled to articulate. The book, when published, became an instant bestseller. Critics praised its raw honesty and profound insights. It resonated not just with outdoor enthusiasts, but with a broader audience who found in Alex's story a metaphor for life's challenges and the human capacity for resilience. In the book's final chapter, Alex reflected on the paradox at the heart of his experience, that it took a brush with death on a remote mountainside for him to truly appreciate the beauty of life. He wrote, "The mountain taught me that we are all, in our own ways, clinging to the side of an impossible peak. Our task is not to reach the summit, but to find joy and meaning in the climb itself." As interest in his story continued to grow, Alex was approached by a documentary filmmaker. The idea was to retrace Alex's journey on Mount McKinley, using modern filming techniques to give viewers a visceral sense of the challenges he had faced. Alex agreed to participate, seeing it as an opportunity to bring his message to an even wider audience. The filming process was emotionally challenging for Alex, returning to the exact locations of his ordeal, accompanied by cameras and crew, brought back vivid memories. But it also provided a sense of closure. Standing on the spot where he had been rescued, Alex felt a profound sense of gratitude for the mountain, for the rescuers who had saved him, and for the life he had been given a chance to continue. The documentary, when released, was a critical success. It combined breathtaking footage of the Alaskan wilderness with intimate interviews and reenactments. Viewers were given a glimpse into the physical and psychological challenges of survival in such an extreme environment. The film's most powerful moments came from Alex's quiet reflections as he stood in the places where he had faced death. As Alex entered his 60s, he began to step back from active mountaineering, but his passion for the mountains never dimmed. He channeled his energy into mentoring young climbers, emphasizing not just technical skills, but also the mental and emotional aspects of the sport. His lessons went beyond climbing techniques, touching on themes of respect for nature, self-awareness, and the importance of knowing when to turn back. In recognition of his contributions to mountaineering and outdoor safety, Alex received numerous awards and honors. But the recognition that meant the most to him came from the letters and messages he received from people whose lives had been touched by his story. From aspiring climbers who had learned to approach the mountains with greater respect, to individuals facing personal challenges who found inspiration in his resilience. These messages reminded Alex of the far-reaching impact of his experience. As he looked back on the years since his rescue, Alex realized that his 72 hours trapped in the frozen wilderness had given him far more than they had taken. They had given him a new perspective on life, a deeper connection with the natural world, and a purpose that extended far beyond personal achievement. In his final public speaking engagement, Alex stood before a group of young mountaineers. His hair was now gray, and his face lined with the years, but his eyes still held the same passion and intensity that had driven him to the world's highest peaks. He looked out at the eager faces before him and smiled. "Remember," he said, his voice strong and clear, "the mountain will always be there. It is not a challenge to be conquered, but a teacher to be respected. Climb not for glory or for records, but for the joy of the journey and the lessons it will teach you. And always remember that the most important peak you'll ever summit is the one within yourself." As Alex's words echoed through the auditorium, there was a moment of profound silence. Then, slowly, the audience rose to their feet, applauding not just the man before them, but the indomitable spirit he represented. In that moment, Alex knew that his legacy would live on, not in records or achievements, but in the wisdom he had gained and shared from his time on the mountain. And so, the story of Alex Lowe, climber, survivor, teacher, became more than just a tale of adventure and survival. It became a testament to the human spirit, a reminder of our place in the natural world, and an inspiration to all who face their own mountains, whatever form they may take. As the sun sets on this chapter of Alex's life, we are left with a profound appreciation for the power of nature, the resilience of the human spirit, and the transformative potential of even our darkest moments. Alex's journey from the frozen wilderness of Mount McKinley to the warm embrace of a life lived with purpose and meaning serves as a beacon of hope and a call to adventure for generations to come. In the end, Alex's story reminds us all that while we may not be able to conquer the mountains, be they physical peaks or personal challenges, we can learn to dance with them, to respect their power, and to find in that dance the very essence of what it means to be alive. Yendi,